Greetings, fellow humans in cyberspace. Now, if you're interested in music and you want to play an instrument or learn music, at some point you're going to run into a thing called the chord. And just any chord, it could be any chord. Here's one. Let's use this as an example, or this one. That's called a chord. Now, you can use traditional, contemporary methods and tricks and devices to figure out the chord. You can do that, because most of the people in the world do that. Or, at some point, you could use my system. You could try it. Now, in the previous videos, I mentioned that when you approach a chord, when you find that chord, using my system, which is called System 2000 Chord Notation, I said that you can figure out what the chord is because it has to be one of four things. And I showed you the standalone bass chords, I showed you the modified bass chords, and the add-on chords. Now in this video, we're going to talk about the fourth type of chord that it can be, and I call this the fifth chord exception. All right? Now, the fifth chord exception is actually a rule in my system. It's one of the very few rules in my system. And I'll try to read this if I can see it properly. Of the 5 chord sizes in System 2000, the fifth bass chord is the only bass chord in which the highest note or the highest tone is allowed to be modified. Okay? In my system, there's an exception. I'm pretty fussy, but there's an exception. With the fifth chord, which you might call a triad, the highest note in the chord is allowed to be modified. All right? And we need that exception because if we didn't have that exception, we wouldn't be able to sensibly notate the smaller chords. Now, here's a few examples. These are fifth chords in my system, because the highest note in the bass chord, all right, is a fifth. So that's a C minor fifth chord. It's a bass chord. There's a C augmented bass chord, and that's a fifth, and a C diminished bass chord. And you don't need to put the 5 in there, as I mentioned, because that's the default chord. That's the basic, very elementary chord. Now, what we have here, though, is we have some fifth chords, and we have some added notes, right? But you see, the note at the fifth, at the interval of a fifth here, in these 3 chords, is not modified, right? That's important. This is how we start to learn this. The fifth note in these 3 examples are not modified, but you see, we have an added note. It's an added note in each one of these chords. So in this case, you have a C major, that's a bass chord, the C major, but you have an added major 6, and that's this right here. In this chord, you have a C augmented, that's a C augmented fifth chord in my system, a bass chord, but you have an added major 6, and in this chord here, you have a C diminished, all right, and you have another added major 6. But I'm showing you these because the fifth in this chord, the note at the interval of a fifth, is not modified. That's just a regular, that was a standalone chord, but when you put that extra note on there, you added, then it became basically an add-on chord. A very simple version or a simple example of an add-on. So I wanted to show you that as it pertains to the fifth chords. Now, here's where we get into the exception, which is a beautiful thing. On the bottom 3 examples, all right, we are using the fifth chord exception. Now you see the note at the interval of a fifth. In other words, the note at the fifth is modified. It is modified. Here you have, as an example chord, you have a C major bass chord. That's how we started out. But we wanted to make this really weird chord, and we didn't know how to notate it, so using my system, we mentally took out the G natural, and we stuck in the G flat, and you have a C major with a diminished fifth, with the diminished 5 there. See it? That's using the fifth chord exception. Now here's another one. Here's a chord. We started out with the C minor bass chord. That was very simple. But you say, well, I need a G sharp. So you took out that G mentally in your mind, and you put in that G sharp, and you got a C minor with an augmented fifth. And here, the third example is you started out with another C minor. All right, you started out with a C minor bass chord, and you say, well, I need an augmented fifth in there. So you put it in, and I need a major sixth, and you get this. And you get a C minor with an augmented fifth and a major sixth added to the chord. Now, without this exception, if you try to notate these and have a system whereby somebody can see it and understand it, without this fifth chord exception, you're just going to have a mess. It's just going to be a gobbledygook. So I have what I call the fifth chord exception. All right. Now, I wanted to show you this in case you're paying attention. Some people actually understand what I'm saying. I know I'm not a teacher, but some people actually understand what I'm saying. And they understand, and they also catch things that they think I might have missed. Let's say we look at this sample chord here. We had a C diminished, all right? We had a C diminished, then we added a major sixth. And you say, oh, wait a second, Joey. I was paying attention and I saw something. Well, you're right. You might have seen this. I just showed you this C diminished, okay, with the added major sixth. All right, I just showed you that. And what you have here is you have a fifth bass chord, all right, with an added major sixth. And we'll make that perfectly clear. All right, but over here, look at this. And we already talked about this before in previous videos. Look at this. You have a seventh bass chord here. Here you started out with a fifth bass chord, but here you have a seventh bass chord as your bass. And I showed you this before, the C diminished 7. That B double flat sounds the same as the A natural. So here you have two different ways, see, two different notations, all right, that sound the same. And both notations are okay, they're allowed, they're correct. But I wanted to show you that this is how you can, if you're paying attention, you can see clearly, if you understand the system, that you start out with a fifth bass chord, but over here you actually start out with a seventh bass chord. And yet, both notations are acceptable. All right? Now some other rules, there aren't too many. Modifications. All right, when you modify a chord, modifications are made only after the bass chord has been established. Okay, I repeat, modifications are made only after the bass chord has been established. Now you probably figured that out already from watching my previous videos. And down here we have, see, when modified, right, the interval movement from its home position in the bass chord should be, whenever possible, only 1/2 step. I'll let you read that there. In other words, the movement, the modification, the movement from its home position, really, if possible, should be only 1/2 step. That's very important. I just wanted to throw that in. And I want to show you examples so you know exactly what I'm talking about. Let's say you have here, let's look at this first. You have a C major 9 bass chord, but you have a modification. diminished 7. Okay? That's what you have. You had start out with your C major 9 bass chord, and you made a modification. It's a modified bass chord. But you see what happened here. First you start out with that major 7. That's normal for that bass chord. Then you lowered it a half step to a minor 7. Then you lowered it a half step to a diminished 7. Two half steps. The movement was 2 half steps. That's what it took to get this chord. And this chord's okay. In my system, it's fine. Nothing wrong with it. But in light of the rule that I mentioned, look at this chord. Here you have a C dominant 9 bass chord, and we have one modification, diminished 7. In other words, we want a diminished 7 in there. So here you started out with your C dominant 9 bass chord, and all you did was you moved 1 half step from the minor 7 to the diminished 7, 1 half step movement. And that's preferable. So you see, of these two chords, though both are okay, there's no problem here, but this would be the preferred. Mentally in your mind, once you learn my system, this would be the preferred chord. And that's that. Now, in my next video, I promise well, I shouldn't promise, but I'll summarize the whole system and wrap it up, because I'm not getting many hits on my new chord symbol videos, so I'll wrap it up. I'm pretty sure I'll wrap it up in my next video, and then maybe get back to some accordion stuff. So that's it. Thank you for being incredibly patient, and I hope to see you soon. Good night.